Hello, viewers, and welcome back to Susty Talk. Yes, Edie's virtual video interview series, set up as a result of the lockdown issued in March 2020, is still continuing. Such is the way with things at the moment. So for those unaware, Susty Talk is Edie's ongoing series of video interviews put together to keep our audience of sustainability and energy professionals talking, feeling connected, and also optimistic during what is, I think this is technically the third lockdown. We had a kind of a circuit break, for lack of better terms, at the end of last year. So virtual remains the way forward, at least for the short term, and that's what this video series aims to do. We're going to be talking to some of the leading lights in the corporate sustainability world. I'm Edie's content editor, Matt Mace, and joining me for this episode of Susty Talk, we have Lucozade Ribena Suntory, which I'm going to just refer to as either Suntory or LRS, just to stop the tongue twister that it can act as. Their Director of Sustainability and External Affairs, Michelle Norman, is joining me now. Michelle, firstly, Happy New Year. How are you? How did you spend the Christmas break?
Hey, Happy New Year, Matt. And I think the last time we actually met in person was probably at Edie Live, where we were doing a video there, but we were all sitting on a sofa together. So how times have changed. But it's good to be speaking with you again. All good here, thank you. Lovely Christmas, lovely at-home Christmas with the family. So, if you've got a small child and the promise of Santa, you can't really go wrong with Christmas. So despite everything, it's all good. And our business is all back and working again from the 4th. So really happy to be back and looking to see what the year brings.
Brilliant to hear. And yeah, that Mission Possible sofa definitely couldn't be rolled out in current times. Definitely not COVID friendly in terms of the 2-meter sofa. And it was quite a snug sofa.
It was very snug.
So yeah, 2020 was bizarre. It was uncomfortable. It was quite frankly horrible for a lot of people, for a multitude of reasons, not just the coronavirus pandemic. And so far in 2021, it looks to be following it in a similar ilk, albeit hopefully temporary, with a lot more promise on the horizon, in terms of the vaccine and I suppose in terms of corporate sustainability, the kind of conveyor belt of green policy initiatives that came out at the end of last year. How were the last 12 months for you and your team in terms of being able to focus on sustainability initiatives, which is long-term in its makeup, and the challenges that brings? How well do you think you've been able to cope with all the disruption that lockdown and kind of move into virtual working has caused?
I think you've got a real challenge on your hands when you're a sustainability professional to balance, as you said, the long-term and then the short-term business needs. And of course, the short-term business need that everyone faced last year was, how do you keep your employees safe and healthy? How do you react to the community situation? How do you pivot or make your business still relevant to the changing circumstances? And then fourthly, how do you still continue your day job moving forward with your sustainability goals? So there was probably a reprioritization in the way that our team worked. And first of all, we obviously worked together to focus on health and safety of our wider team. Secondly, was probably pivoting some of the work that we did around the community to really support the community, whether it be drinks donations to the NHS. So part of that comes under my team as well, of the work that we do in the community. And actually, if you're giving drinks donations to NHS, you're also supporting reducing food waste with products that won't necessarily be sold because of the change in consumer consumption patterns. So it all ties in quite nicely. And then, of course, you work to see what does the business need just to basically get through the next 6 to 12 months. So what can my team do to support? And then fourthly, what do we need to do differently to make sure our sustainability goals and targets stay on track? And that is really important to look at. What can we do that supports the business? What can we do to help the business grow? And then what do we need to do that doesn't compromise any future work that we may or may not want to do as well, whether it's reducing plastic initiatives, reducing our carbon emissions, etc. So that's probably where we had to do some of the greatest change, was look at the plans, look to see what plans could be continued, progressed, delivered, and what plans may or may not have need to go on hold because either financially the priorities were somewhere else or resource had been redeployed elsewhere. And actually, it was probably more resource issues rather than the business saying you can't do something. It was, do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right people available to help us achieve what we need to achieve? But I would say we had a really successful year for 2020, despite everything. And probably the biggest success of that year was probably the relaunch of the Ribena bottle, or I should say the launch of the new Ribena bottle, which I have one I prepared earlier. And for this year, this is 18 months in the making to completely change the bottle, the labelling, the look and feel. And 18 months that could have legitimately been derailed due to COVID, but actually the commitment of both the UK business and the global business to this product will change. It will be 100% recyclable. It will, project our vision of growing for good. We will continue to invest and give the resource that it needs and move ahead with that. So that was a huge success for the business, that we could actually still progress, move forward and deliver during a terrible pandemic year with something that basically is going to be much better for the planet. It's going to support our business and help us grow as well. So it fulfills a number of needs. So I'd say that was probably our biggest success story of 2020.
Good to hear so much success there in what's been a tough year. And you mentioned the I suppose the resources in terms of human capital and how that's taken on. And a question I always like to ask sustainability professionals when they come on this is how well they were able to engage with, I suppose, other areas of the business. And the answer usually comes down to how embedded sustainability is across the business. But I suppose a common challenge that sustainability professionals have is around behaviour change with staff or getting kind of an understanding or buy-in. Did you find that actually, because there was home working, because you could just access them at a tap of a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, that you were actually able to have conversations with other areas of the businesses where perhaps there was a bit of resistance before?
The way that we work, we're a fairly small team, a core team within our business. And because of that, by nature of that, we work cross-functionally anyway. So we're fairly embedded across all the various functions, whether it's R&D, supply chain, marketing, etc. So there's a benefit that we're not a discrete team anyway. So that always helps on those connections. I think some of it is about being very pragmatic and learning where it's appropriate for you to try and push forward the agenda. And if you know that nobody wants to talk about a carbon emission reduction in a particular area because they're focused on, why aren't we selling more of X or Y, you just have to be really sensitive to those facts. And actually, if you're smart and sensitive about it, you probably make more inroads and more gains because you know exactly where to play. Sometimes it is easier to get hold of people when they're online. Sometimes what could be a 5-minute corridor conversation to get a quick alignment on something could mean you've got to schedule a meeting 2 to 3 weeks in advance. So I think there's pros and cons of home working. Nothing really replaces face-to-face interactions, big creative brainstorms, as you probably know from your industry. So I think it's a combination of the two. But I would say one of the things that we do have within the Suntory network is a very strong internal communications network. So we use those very strategically to talk about sustainability. We share with our employees what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the benefit will be. And therefore, a lot of people are engaged. And we have an engagement survey that we do every year. One of the questions is, do you feel we are making gains on sustainability? Do you feel that we're doing more for our community and our environment? And actually, we increased our engagement score. So our employees actually think we're doing more. And they feel more engaged with sustainability. So we do have an actual measure on that as well. So people do feel engaged. And I think probably going back to the point I was making about the Ribena one in the UK, an example, they can actually see that things are being delivered. And that therefore makes them more engaged because they can actually see physical things happening. Whereas sometimes I think when you just talk about your long-term 10-year goals or your 2050 goals for net zero, it's very hard to see what the tangible results and what that actually looks like. So I think the proof is we have to deliver some tangible aspects and evidence of the sustainability gains. That breeds the engagement, and therefore people want to get more involved. It's very hard to turn down a call from somebody from sustainability because you kind of always feel you want to do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think anyone is purposely unsustainable. It's more a barrier of issues, whether it's time resources or just lack of understanding. So I completely agree with that. And on net zero as well, it was a big year for in terms of in July, I think it was that was it net zero pledge came across, not just for the operation, but across your multinational value chain by 2050, by mid-century was unveiled. There's interim targets as well, so there's a pathway there. It's not just here's the pledge and we'll figure out how to get there at a later date, which we have seen some organisations do, and they obviously build on existing science-based targets that had been set as well. And I know you said it's the tangibles that really drive engagement, but how has the reaction been, I suppose, both internally amongst staff, but also externally amongst perhaps consumers and stakeholders to that target? And also, was that target impacted at all by lockdown, or was it like we're ready to roll this out, we can roll this out, so we will?
Yes, and we've been discussing a 2050 target or a net zero target, I should say, for quite a while as a total global business. And there was actually not a question of when is the right time to do this? Should we delay because of pandemic? It was, no, we are doing this. And actually, it's the right time to do it because it gives a signifier of intent. But the absolute focus for us is still on the science-based targets, because that's the immediate challenge, both Scope 1 and 2 and 3. And if we don't get those, then a net zero target just becomes very, very difficult. We've got to deliver to 2030. That's absolutely imperative. And the engagement of our suppliers, our co-packers, our bottlers, our partners is absolutely key. And that's why when we set our 2050 target, it was on that total value chain, because it's not enough if we just do it on our own production facilities. We have to work with the total value chain to do this. And I've been really encouraged to see so many other businesses launch similar targets. I have questions over businesses that have launched targets that are a lot more imminent to 2030, particularly the how are they going to do it? Are they going to do it in the right way? And I think that's really important when you look at, there are lots of businesses who are saying, we'll become carbon neutral, we'll plant a forest. Actually, are you really managing and reducing carbon emissions in your own value chain first before you move to offsetting? And that, for us, I think that's probably where we want to have a real practical roadmap that shows, what we're genuinely doing. Offsetting plays a role, of course, but I think we really need to focus on actually getting those emissions down as much as we can first before we start to look at the alternatives. Measures that the government are introducing on green recovery, green infrastructure investments, emerging technologies will be absolutely vital. So we want to be part of those conversations. It's really encouraging to see BEIS signifying some investments there as well. But that's going to be absolutely paramount if we can make this whole shift towards net zero.
No, great point. So yeah, and I think offsetting is still such an interesting debate. But and it's strange because I in turn speak to sustainability leaders, businesses that have sustainability quite far ahead, and everyone is in agreement that offsetting has a role, but it's kind of, you can't rely on it as your main route to decarbonisation. So I'm glad that the conversation has matured to there from no, it can't be used at all, it is just greenwashing. I think there's a bit more balance and nuance to that, which is great to hear. I want to touch on the plastics. You kind of mentioned the Ribena bottle, your kind of Blue Peter style. You had one earlier, which is great. And obviously that's a huge area for your organisation as well. Suntory pledged to eliminate all virgin fossil fuel-based plastics from packaging sold in Europe by 2030. And you're taking, much like with carbon reduction, there's no kind of silver bullet. There's a range of different things you're looking into, chemical recycling, deposit return schemes as well. And we were discussing this before I started recording. We went live. As a journalist, the news that was coming into my inbox during 2020, it felt like plastics after the Blue Planet moment of 2018 and 2019, the progress that caused, it kind of felt like it had fallen off a cliff almost, because we just weren't getting many releases coming in about it. Businesses weren't really talking about it. It was all green recovery, net zero. And, when the first lockdown ended in September, all of these plastic announcements started coming through, and it was like, okay, no, they had been working on these behind the scenes. It's just plastics is much more of a consumer-facing issue for a lot of businesses, and they hadn't been able to get in front of consumers. And And it was refreshing that in a year where net zero and the climate crisis became such a big issue for a lot of businesses, which is obviously great, but also health and safety and the pandemic and the restrictions that caused. It was good to see that plastics was still very much the focus. And for you and your organisation, what challenges and opportunities did 2020 throw up in terms of your progress against your plastic targets?
Yeah, so first of all, just a bit of clarification, our moving away from virgin fossil fuels is actually a global target rather than just in Europe. And that was something that, Suntory Holdings, is going to be challenging in places like some of our Asian markets, etc. Where they're maybe not as far advanced in some of the developments on the new technologies as we are here in Europe. We're actually fairly mature in some of the work we're doing on plastics here. So that's a brilliant that our whole group is orientated towards that. The two aspects that we're focused on here in Europe is firstly to make all the products designed for circularity, to make them fully recyclable, and then the material that they're made of as well to be fully sustainable. So it's not from virgin sources. So those two aspects go hand in hand. And often on the recyclability, sometimes we have to fix some issues that are there, such as our current packaging on what was Ribena, but Lucozade Sport, where we have full sleeves, so bottles fully wrapped. That is not something that all the nurse and purse can cope with in the UK. So therefore, if we're going to design for circularity and we want bottles to be made into bottles, and don't forget, 74% of these bottles might be collected, but only 8% go on to be made bottles. That's not great, is it? So that's something we have to change. So if we can, enable that to happen, that's brilliant. And then if we're providing that market for that secondary raw material, that's the pull and the driver, and ultimately, hopefully, then that will reduce the volume of packaging even going on the market in the first place. So it'd be a sweet spot for that. And I think the challenges for 2020 could have been, that's a huge amount of investment to do something like Ribena. Not only are you changing bottle molds, so you've got new shapes, you're changing sleeving equipment to a whole new machinery. You have to take off a wall of a factory to put a whole new machine in. Massive infrastructure projects. It could have been quite easy for the management to have said, actually, we need to redeploy those funds into doing X, Y, and Z. And actually, is it more burdensome on our people when there's times of stress? The decision made was, we carry on. We are going to deliver this. It's in our plans. It's right for the consumer. It's right for our retailers, and it's right for us as employees. And those are critical conversations. But critical conversations actually do enable, success. So I think those would probably be some of the challenges. Are those projects that you say are behind the scenes and not consumer facing, do they continue? And they did in our business, certainly. So for us, there was no putting anything on the back foot. It was all just continuing business as usual. We said we were going to do it. We went to plan, and then we announced. Now, the announcement is a consumer facing announcement, We haven't got the product, maybe it hasn't rolled onto shelf as quickly as one would have hoped, because the drinks are being sold in very different ways and consumption patterns have changed. So that's probably where you maybe don't see that consumer pull at the moment and the consumer facing comms, but certainly corporately we've been talking about it a lot, and the consumer work will start in earnest this quarter.
Brilliant to hear, and brings us nicely on to 2021. It's good to see those plans are in place, because we focused on last year, and we're in the early days of a new year. It doesn't really feel like a new year necessarily. We're kind of back in lockdown. Stuff going on in the US right now is just kind of strange and uncomfortable to watch in terms of civil unrest mounting, and the climate crisis continues to deliver more bad news than good in a global sense, not necessarily in terms of response from governments and businesses, which is certainly picking up, but the impact continues to be felt globally. But there is promise, both in terms of the vaccine rollout in the UK, COP26 on that horizon, and the UK has kind of, laid a fair few bit of strategy out, albeit the actual net zero strategy we're still waiting on. So there's I suppose the building blocks of good news, which means there could be some sense of normality, or at least a new normal or a next normal. I think this pandemic and lockdowns prove we can't go back to the old economy and the old way of business as usual. But for 2021, for you both as a sustainability professional and your organisation, what would success look like for you this year?
It's a great question. From a business point of view, success would look like all of our employees continue to stay safe, happy, and healthy. I think that's the absolute priority, and with that comes therefore engagement, motivation, passion for doing what you do. So that would be what success would look like. That our business still continues to operate in a positive way with growth for the brands and also growth for our people as well. And then from a sustainability perspective, that the plans that we've got laid in place continue. So hot on the heels of Ribena would come Lucozade Sport with very similar moves in terms of the reduction of the packaging and the reimagining of the brands. But also on top of that, looking forward to COP26, what can we do to look at the new consumer behaviour, how things have changed, whether it's the consumer patterns of consumption, recycling, transportation, and what do we therefore need to do, for our sustainability goals to make sure that we are in line with how the consumer behaviour has changed. So what do we need to do to change? If we're looking at some home working, for example, and how does that contribute to reduction in carbon emissions from our transportation? Do the plans that we had in place, let's say around transition of our vehicles to renewable energy, how necessary is that when people aren't moving so much in cars? So therefore, do we put the resource that we were going to do for that into something new and different to react to those change of ways? So that will be quite interesting. And I think there's some questions to be asked there. The other piece around is on health and well-being, and linked to sustainability. For us, the social impact of people's well-being is something that comes within my team as well. So we'll look at everything from sugar reduction in our products, but also the purpose of our brands. How can our brands help people enhance their lives? And Lucozade Sport is a brilliant one on how Lucozade Sport, people couldn't necessarily go out and exercise last year. What they did, they supported personal trainers to basically give them space on our platforms, on our channels, to actually bring free personal training sessions to the nation, and we were able to support them financially. So what we did, we looked at how we could help them have more sustainable business models. And I think that's really interesting about how brands can basically do good in different ways. So it's not necessarily just about the carbon footprint of their product, but it's about what they can do and bring to enhance society and help support society going forward. And you talked about a new normal. I think that will become the new normal of actually, brands and consumers. There's been a loyalty and a love for brands, but actually what can the brand bring to the member of the public, to businesses, to entrepreneurs, to really help and support them?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think social sustainability and I suppose business purpose and the role that they play in society is going to be something that's increasingly examined and increasingly kind of, I suppose, trumpeted's not the right word, but championed, I suppose, by businesses. They're going to really realise that that's a key lever, more so than traditional CSR, where perhaps the social aspect was seen as a bit more softer. The S in ESG was not really perhaps fully appreciated. We've seen it already on EDie. The articles kind of show that it's definitely rising up. So it'd be interesting to see how businesses kind of reflect the role that they play in a society that right now, as the pandemic has proved and as going on in the US, isn't necessarily equal. That social mobility is a real issue, and I'd like to see the role that businesses will play in that as well. And Michelle, just finally, what about you personally? Is there any kind? Did you set a New Year's resolution, for example? I know I heard the little puppy yapping away before we started. I imagine looking after the new puppy is going to be a thing for you as well.
Yeah, it'll definitely encourage me to get out and about and do more exercise and working. And I think that probably my biggest personal piece is take some time for me to probably live my own values and actually go out and make time for myself and do the health and well-being for myself. It's so important. But I think the point on the social impact that we can have as sustainability professionals and bring that lens to the business. because we focus so long on the environmental impacts that we do as a business, but actually we are so well placed with the work that we do as sustainability leaders to bring that. And I think probably 2020 has opened the eyes of business leaders to actually the value that we as businesses can have in society and how we can work in tandem to really make a difference on social impact. So I think through forums such as edie, where we can share those stories to inspire others, will be absolutely brilliant. So it's kind of a bound up of a personal and professional hope that some of the patterns of behaviour that we've seen last year won't go away, and that we'll be able to keep them going forward.
Yeah, and hopefully it's not too long before we can share those stories in person. But who knows? But Michelle, thank you so much for being a great guest on this series. Like I said, when we started it last March, I don't think we envisioned it running through to 2021, perhaps rather naively on our part there. But it's proved a great way to be able to get a temperature check on our audience. And I suppose not just the challenges, but the optimism that they have as well. So thank you so much for taking part in Susty Talk. For our viewers, it's going to continue going. We've got them lined up all the way through to our Sustainability Leaders Forum, which is taking place in February, and we'll undoubtedly do that beyond that as well, with the lockdown likely to last beyond that as well. So do check out the edie website, search Susty Talk, and you can watch the whole backlog of interviews as well. There's quite a few, ranging to when it was perhaps sunnier climes than it is now as well. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay positive, and keep up the Susty Talk.